Hello and welcome to Endora is Still Learning. Venti's third rerun is on its way, along with Kamisato Ayato. So the big question is, should you even pull for Venti? While every account has its own needs and problems, for the majority of travelers, the answer is going to be yes. Unless you already have a Venti. Though Venti has lost value within the later floors of Spiral Abyss, he still remains a highly usable character during combat-based events. Venti also possesses the same gliding passive as Amber, but with the advantage of being able to trigger Animo Resonance, making him amazing for world exploration. Venti was the first playable Archon released, and with that comes an impressive skill set. Unfortunately, this moveset has become less impressive over time because of one thing: heavier and larger enemies. Inazuma introduced us to Kairagi, large Rift Hounds, and a new type of Lalatril, and even more Ruin Machines, all of which are immune to Venti's sucking prowess. They even have the nerve to occupy the last floors of Spiral Abyss, further raining on his little parade. In order to highlight his strengths and weaknesses, we'll be working backwards, starting with his burst. In the early days of Genshin, smaller enemies dominated Spiral Abyss, domains, and the overworld. Venti's burst, Wind's Grand Ode, creates a large vacuum that sucks in most non-flying lightweight enemies, dealing animo damage and even swirl damage when paired with another element that can be infused into his burst. It's a very powerful crowd control ability that can dominate a field and make certain challenges trivial, and most overworld fights non-existent, even without constellations or a 5-star weapon.
Are you here to play with me?
Pick the wrong test subject.
Look at me. Just once more.
Venti's passive talent, Storm Eye, will quickly refill your burst energy, often ensuring you have it back before the cooldown is over. When Wind's Grand Ode ends, Venti will generate 15 energy as a type of refund. Additionally, if elemental absorption occurs within his burst, characters of that element type will also gain 15 energy, providing extra support to his team. Venti's skill, Skyward Sonnet, specifically his first ascension passive, Embrace of Winds, has its most value in the overworld when traveling/exploring. Inside challenges, it's mostly used as an extra burst of damage, but in the overworld, you'll find yourself using it frequently. Creating on-demand wind vents is not only fun, but also very convenient. When exploring new areas of the map, these updrafts can assist in conserving stamina when climbing, gliding over large gaps, or even just getting around a pesky cliff edge. When pressing the skill, Venti will do a quick burst of damage in an AoE, dealing animo damage, and generating 3 elemental particles. By holding the skill, you'll create a similar but larger AoE with the addition of launching yourself in the air as well as your enemies. Enemies caught will slowly descend back to the ground as well as generate 4 elemental particles. It's also possible to use Embrace of Winds to dodge enemy attacks, including that pesky Oceanid Mimic explosion. However, you'll have a higher damage output just by utilizing the press variant in most cases. Now we get to the least impressive part of his kit, his normals. Venti's divine marksmanship is, less than divine, because the only thing divine about Venti is the godly amount of alcohol you can consume. Venti works best as an off-fielder. You'll most likely find yourself switching to him to pop his skill and burst before quickly switching to another character to then infuse his vacuum with another element, if not infused already. The only thing remarkable about his normals is his first constellation, which unfortunately is not that remarkable. So let's talk about his constellations, the drawbacks and the benefits of pulling for them. Just a quick note, if you don't already have Venti, an absolutely guaranteed pull requires 180 fate, with each following constellation needing another additional 180. So, oftentimes, a new character will provide more value and excitement to your account over a lackluster constellation. Speaking of which, Venti's first constellation is very lackluster, and is a bad return on your investment. Constellation 1, Splitting Gales, fires 2 additional arrows per aimed shot, each dealing 33% of the original arrow's damage. There is only one Venti build that takes advantage of his first constellation, appropriately called Shotgun Venti. For most players, especially free-to-plays, you'll be focused on crowd control using his burst and skill, hardly ever taking advantage of Venti's aimed shot. Though, if you do choose to run Shotgun Venti, it's purely for fun. This meme-tastic build should be seen as a bonus for later constellations, and not something to strive for. Venti's Constellation 2, Breeze of Reminiscence, is where you start seeing a return on your investment, though still minimal. Skyward Sonnet will now decrease opponents' animo resistance and physical resistance by 12% for 10 seconds. Opponents launched by Skyward Sonnet suffer an additional 12% animo resistance and physical resistance decrease while airborne. With C2 Venti, you'll be doing a lot of shredding with animo. However, a problem typically arises when you realize how few physical and animo attacks can actually hit the airborne enemies. Constellation 3, Ode to Thousand Winds, is a simple 3-level burst increase, which is a very nice buff to Venti's Wind Grand Ode. Constellation 4, Hurricane of Freedom, will give Venti a 25% animo damage bonus for 10 seconds when he picks up an elemental orb or particle, which matches the 10-second cooldown of his skill Skyward Sonnet very nicely. Constellation 5, Concierto del Cielo, will boost Venti's skill level by 3. And finally, Constellation 6, Storm of Defiance, is another enemy debuff that shreds enemy animo resistance. Targets who take damage from Venti's Vortex have their animo resistance decreased by 20%. If an elemental absorption occurred, then the resistance towards the corresponding element is also decreased by 20%. Venti's constellations seemingly become more impressive after C1. Having to push past his first constellation is rough. However, his later constellations still pose a major flaw in his design. They enforce resistance down over boosting elemental damage. How resistance down works is it is subtracted from an enemy's base resistance until the enemy reaches 0% resistance. Any further resistance down is then halved in effectiveness. When you consider that most enemies have a 10% elemental resistance and the majority aligned with animo are straight up immune to it, you find Venti at Constellation 2 will only drop animo resistance by 17% instead of 24%. And Constellation 6 will drop at a total of 27% instead of 44%. Another consideration is Venti's best-in-slot artifact set, Viridescent Venrer, which only increases swirl damage but applies a 40% resistance down to any element Venti swirls. This can be compared to Venti's Constellation 6, providing a 15% resistance down, while his artifacts would apply 25%. Overall, Venti without constellations is great. He doesn't need them to be good. But if you happen to get unlucky, there are other characters you can pull for, or already have, that will be more or just as useful as Venti in the current meta. Sucrose is a powerful crowd control skill that can pull enemies in closer, and ever since the 1.6 Elemental Reactions buff, with high Elemental Mastery, she can hit massive swirl reactions with relative ease. She'll even buff her teammates' Elemental Mastery in the process, which is why she's often used in Electrocharge teams. With her first constellation, Clustered Vacuum Field, Sucrose's crowd control skill, Astable Animo Hypostasis Creation 6308, gains an additional charge. Give Sucrose the catalyst weapon Sacrificial Fragments, which has a chance to end her skill cooldown, and you'll find yourself pulling in enemies up to 3 times in rapid succession. Even her burst has a crowd control effect to it, without lifting enemies too high up in the air for you to hit. Looking at you, Venti. Another character who's a huge game changer is Inazuman Aether. Sorry, I mean Kaidahara Kazuha. Kazuha's crowd control ability comes from his skill, just like Sucrose. Kazuha's skill even launches him in the air, kinda like Venti's skill, and you're able to activate it mid-glide for some extra distance while exploring. The skill Chihayaburu has amazing crowd control abilities. Pressing the skill sucks nearby enemies in, dealing animo damage as well as swirl damage when combined with other elements. Holding the skill will launch you in the air, just like his press skill, and it'll also set you up for Kazuha's unique plunging attack, Midare Ranzen, creating a small amount of suction pulling enemies in upon landing. Finally, his burst, Kazuha Slash, hits enemies in a much larger AoE than Venti's burst. It won't hold any enemies in place like Venti can, but the large AoE combined with Kazuha's passive talent makes it extremely versatile. His passive talent, Poetics of Fubutsu, grants an elemental damage bonus based off his elemental mastery to any element he triggers Swirl with. Well, I think it's finally time to talk about the biggest downside to owning a Venti. For those of you who drink, and have alcohol lying around, you'll start noticing that your drinks will start to go missing.
I like to drink, and I like the wind. Oh, if only there was such a thing as wind brewed cider.
All jokes aside, Venti's just a fun character to own, and if you don't already have him, you'll enjoy giving enemies the big suck when he finally comes home. Need help collecting Venti's Ascension materials? We got you covered with a farming route guide. Want more videos like this one? Subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when new videos like this one drop. Have suggestions for topics you'd like us to cover? Leave a comment and let us know what you'd like to see in a future video. Thanks for watching, and remember, Endora is still learning.